This is VOA Africa.
Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Thursday, August 6th. This is Africa 54. Due to the global outbreak of COVID-19, Voice of America is taking every necessary precaution to safeguard its employees. So our broadcast will look a little different today and in the near future as we, out of an abundance of caution, reduce our staffing at VOA headquarters here in Washington. We're working to help keep you informed about what's going on, and we appreciate you staying with us on Africa 54. The issues of police brutality and social justice are not unique to one country. As the Black Lives Matter movement has grown in the United States, it has inspired citizens of other countries, including many in Africa, to take a hard look at their own policing systems. VOA Salem Solomon has this in-depth report.
The protest movement that grew in outrage over the murder of George Floyd, an African American man who died under the knee of a police officer in Minneapolis, has been felt across the globe. It resonates in Africa, where it not only unleashed protests and a show of solidarity with the U.S. marches, but also debate on issues at home, including police brutality, income and class inequalities, and the bitter legacy of colonialism.
The message was basically that it is one struggle. It manifests itself differently, but it is one struggle. It's a global struggle, and we all need to be talking about it because we all need reform. Every system does need reform.
Demonstrations were staged in Senegal, where people were holding signs that read, "Trop c'est trop," or "Enough is enough." In Nigeria, the killing of a teenager in Lagos by police enforcing a curfew prompted outrage. In South Africa, protesters and political leaders wore black T-shirts emblazoned with the last words uttered by Floyd. In Kenya, protesters gathered outside the U.S. Embassy in Nairobi, holding signs and chanting, "Black Lives Matter," and "Silence is violence." As in many African nations, excessive force by police is an issue in Kenya. According to a report by the Daily Nation, 101 people were killed by police in Nairobi during a particularly bloody 9-month stretch in 2018. There are many connections between social justice movements in the U.S. and in Africa. On June 25th, Congresswoman Karen Bass, the chair of the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Africa, celebrated the passage of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. She said she hopes it inspires a similar change on the African continent.
I think that they can take how important it is to have mass movements, because we moved within 30 days to do this piece of legislation. Literally, it was 30 days after the murder of George Floyd. And our legislative body can take 30 years. We can take 30 years or 30 days. But because of the social pressure, we had to move quickly, and that's why we were able to get it done last night. The protesters, we need them to continue protesting. Of course, we want it to be peaceful, but I will tell you that it was their victory.
For some, the movement has brought back painful memories, but also inspired hope. In 1999, police officers shot 41 bullets at Guinean immigrant Amadou Diallo outside his apartment building in the Bronx, New York. He was holding only his wallet, which police say they mistook for a weapon. Today, his mother says she believes her son's death played a role in advancing social justice.
It's not just US, it's also Africa, it's Europe, it's everyone, Australia, everywhere people are marching, protesting in Asia and demanding changes. I believe my son opened the door then, 21 years ago, because that was a conversation without any social media platform then. But the media was really telling about this incident around the world. People were watching, protesting, reading about it. The difference today is because we have social media. And also the difference today is because so many incidents has happened and people have had enough.
In the U.S., police officers are speaking out against abusive tactics like the ones used against Floyd. They say unnecessary violence by an officer is a stain on the entire profession, and they want it to stop.
I'll speak for myself. That is not why I became a law enforcement officer. I don't represent the officers that exhibited tactics that are not part of our training. I don't believe that a lot of things that were done correctly, and I'm appalled by that as law enforcement. Wearing this badge, wearing this uniform, I stand to protect, I stand to serve our community. I'm there for them if they need us.
From Minneapolis to Dakar, from Nairobi to Lagos and beyond, the impact of George Floyd's death and the Black Lives Matter movement it amplified continues to be felt. Activists in African countries believe the last chapter of this story is yet to be written. Salem Solomon, VOA News, Washington.
The death of an African American man, George Floyd, in May while in custody of police in Minneapolis is renewing conversations about whether having more women in law enforcement might lower the use of excessive force. Women in Blue, a recent documentary by Deidre Fishel, showcases de-escalation skills by female police officers at the Minneapolis Police Department. It also presents challenges for women in a male-dominated field. VOA's Penelope Blue explains.
The challenge is to treat everyone involved in that call neutrally and not have any predisposed thoughts or predictions.
In her film Women in Blue, Deidre Fishel chronicles some of the challenges female police officers face as they help train fellow officers against excessive use of force in the male-dominated Minneapolis Police Department. Officer Alice White is one of the trainers.
You interact with people who are rapists, murderers. It's sometimes hard to show respect to someone like that. So in my mind, I had to switch this to professionalism. As long as you're being professional, you're gonna look respectful.
The film echoes findings, one as early as the 1970s by the National Police Foundation, that female police officers act less aggressively and believe in using less aggression than their male counterparts.
I just knew that I wanted to make a film exploring what women could bring in a very troubled time that our country has had with police violence.
Hi. Do you know I'm stopping you? You can calm down. I see you're shaking. Just relax. Relax. It's all good.
You can see in that traffic stop that man that was stopped by Alice had someone who was nurturing and had his well-being at the top and not some law enforcement.
But the film also shows women remaining sidelined, making up only 16% of the Minneapolis Police Department.
The chief has selected no women for his executive team. I have a great deal of respect for Chief Rondo. But the thing that hurt me the most was the fact that in a profession dominated by male voices, they're losing any female perspective.
In Seattle, Police Chief Carmen Best says her department's recruitment ads are designed to attract more women to the force.
We want to show more women. We want to show women in diverse positions. We want to make sure that it's not always car chases and gunfights and rappelling off buildings. A lot of what we do has nothing to do with brawn. It has a lot more to do with brain and skill sets and the ability to empathize and to work with people.
It's not just that we need more women, but we need a lot more women of color. I think that's where our police departments could potentially transform.
I got assigned to become a sergeant in the 4th Precinct.
Her film shows only a few African American female officers, like Alice White, rising through the ranks.
It's important for the Black community to see women who look like me in this role.
Chief Best relates her own experience rising through the ranks.
Some folks, while super supportive, others were not maybe, and there was always working through that. My resolve was, that's their problem, not mine. I'm here to do my job. I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. And I really believe that as you move up, you have to lift up and bring others along with you.
Penelope Pulu, VOA News, Washington.
Lebanon's president has announced a 2-week state of emergency and declared a period of mourning after at least one huge explosion rocked the capital Beirut, killing at least 135 people and wounding 5,000 others. Many remain missing as rescue workers come through massive piles of rubble. Lebanon's interior minister says the blast in the city's port area appears to have been caused by ammonium nitrate stored at a warehouse, but how it happened is still not clear. Among the injured was Beirut reporter Ancha Vora, whose home was damaged in the explosion. After getting treatment, she filed this report.
Soaked in blood, young and old faces crowded Jamese Street in West Beirut, a Christian-majority neighborhood and considered one of the safest places in Lebanon. Red Cross volunteers have been scrambling to provide first aid and refer severe cases to overwhelmed hospitals. A scene of chaos, of desperation. An injured man on the street summed it up by saying, "This is Lebanon." The catastrophe comes on top of the pandemic and unfolds as the country reels under its worst economic and political crisis since a devastating civil war in the 1970s and 80s. The scenes were, for many, a traumatic flashback. In the early evening hours of Tuesday, an explosion, possibly two, rocked the city, shattering buildings, blowing out windows and doors. Rescue workers believed many people were still buried under the debris on Wednesday. A thick plume of smoke rose above Beirut's port, and while the country's chief of internal security spoke of stored explosives as a possible cause, some people on the street blamed the ongoing tensions between the Iran-supported Hezbollah and Israel as a possible cause. Many Lebanese, especially those who remember the war, are stunned by their own bad luck and wondering what more the year 2020 will bring. The tragedy left no one in Beirut untouched. This is what my home looks like now. I was injured too, but I'm not dead. And I am lucky. Anshul Vora for VOA News, Beirut.
South Africa on Thursday is receiving help in its fight against COVID-19. The country is hosting a team of experts from the World Health Organization. The WHO says the group of 43 specializes in epidemiology and surveillance, prevention and control, and health education, and are supporting South Africa's COVID-19 response team. The WHO surge team is observing the work of South Africa's health department before lending special support to jurisdictions impacted the most, including Eastern Cape, Free State, Gauteng, KwaZulu-Natal, and Mpumalanga. The increasing spread of the virus has pushed South Africa to nearly 530,000 infections, the fifth highest in the world, and it has confirmed almost 9,300 deaths from coronavirus, according to Johns Hopkins University. In a separate development, Health Minister Dr. Zwelini Mkhize says cases in Gauteng, Western Cape, and Eastern Cape are slowing, but it's too early to determine if the infections have peaked. Elsewhere in Africa, Gambia is imposing a 3-week 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. curfew beginning Thursday, after coronavirus cases jumped 60% in the last week to nearly 800 with 16 deaths, according to Johns Hopkins University. A Gambia government spokesman says public gatherings are being banned and markets will have to close by 2 p.m. Diamond prices and demand were weak before the coronavirus lockdown, but enforced proximity looks to kindling romance and feel-good spending in South Africa. Edward Barron reports.
South Africa's diamond industry is famed all over the world. But even before people were locked down at home, prices were already weakening, as was demand. Anglo-American's De Beers until last week reported a plunge in earnings. But some of the smaller South African players who polish the rough diamonds that De Beers and other miners unearth say they'd been pleasantly surprised by the extent of local lockdown jewellery buying. Enforced proximity is apparently kindling romance and feel-good spending. Keely-Boga Poulet's cutting and polishing firm, Nungu Diamonds, said its custom-made jewellery sales have grown 60% since South Africa imposed a strict lockdown in March.
Where I'm specifically passionate is in seeing South Africans and Africans consuming these diamonds. It's one thing to go all over the world and telling people what they know. They know our diamonds are amazing. It's another altogether to educate our local South Africans and Africans to say, begin to enjoy them and also learn their value, because they're a store of wealth.
Customers have been using their time at home for online consultations and lining up their purchases for when stores reopened in June. That turned out to be the Nungu's best month for a year. Jewellery prices also held steady, allowing the company to employ a new in-house jewellery designer. There's still scope for improvement for others. Lower global demand has depressed the prices of uncut, unpolished rough stones bought from mines. That's bad news for suppliers like Thoko Diamonds. In a typical year, the family firm would ordinarily supply more than 500 carats. So far this year, it's sold fewer than 20, and profits have fallen 65% as exports dried up. It's now turned to jewellery making to boost its profits, hoping its new line in finished earrings will appeal to the local market.
That was Edward Barron of Reuters reporting. We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Stay with us. Welcome back to Africa 54. Americans will go to the polls November 3rd to elect a president. The incumbent Republican Donald Trump and his presumptive Democratic challenger Joe Biden both face a polarized electorate. In this report, Michael Sullivan profiles the incumbent president and his re-election message to the American people.
He is draining the political swamp, defending his country's borders, and renewing the dream for forgotten Americans, say his supporters.
There's probably never been a time when candidates are so different. We want law and order. They don't want law and order. We want strong, closed borders with people able to come in through merit, through a legal process.
The other view of Trump, he's not up to the job, says his Democratic rival.
Dangerously incompetent and incapable, in my view, of world leadership and leadership at home.
Trump is a real estate magnate and former reality television star who faced skepticism when he announced his run for the presidency in 2015. He beat Democrat and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, surprising many by connecting with millions of Americans.
Disproportionately, they're blue-collar workers. Disproportionately, they do not have a college education, but their loyalty to Trump is fierce.
Trump faced allegations that he tried to trade U.S. foreign aid to Ukraine for political favors, The House of Representatives impeached Trump on charges of abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. A witch hunt, Trump declared, claiming vindication after the Republican-dominated Senate acquitted him. Then he faced another challenge.
Tonight, I want to speak with you about our nation's unprecedented response to the coronavirus outbreak.
As the number of virus cases and deaths in America grew, Trump's polling numbers sank. Adding to political controversy, national protests over the deaths of African American men in police custody, and outbreaks of violent demonstrations in some cities, followed by Trump's use of federal troops to tamp down the protests.
I think that the coronavirus ripped off the Band-Aid that has been covering a lot of long, festering sores.
While Biden leads in most polls, Trump's base is mostly sticking by him.
And by and large, I think most Republicans have gotten the policies that they wanted. They wanted lower taxes. They wanted conservatives on the Supreme Court. For example, they wanted to cut down on immigration.
But adding to Trump's troubles, recent news that the U.S. economy suffered its biggest drop on record. With public health officials discouraging mass rallies, it's hard to generate the excitement usually seen in a political campaign over social media. Challenges for Trump in this election year. Mike O'Sullivan, VOA News, Los Angeles.
Joe Biden has delayed announcing his pick for his vice presidential running mate amid speculation of internal opposition to frontrunner California Senator Kamala Harris. VOA's Brian Padden reports that other possible choices are emerging, who are reportedly seen as more of team players than Harris, a past rival for the Democratic nomination who clashed with Biden during the primary campaign.
Joe Biden has extended his vice presidential search after reports of growing opposition within the party to top contender California Senator Kamala Harris. While campaigning earlier this year, Biden promised to name a highly qualified woman as his running mate. Since then, there has been increasing calls for him to choose an African American as racial equality protests have intensified across the country.
It will go a long way to motivating Black voters and perhaps those young people that are not so keen on him to come to the polls in November.
As a prominent senator, Harris, the daughter of Indian and Jamaican immigrants and a former presidential candidate herself, seemed the likely choice. But Harris's loyalty and ambition are reportedly being questioned by some key Biden advisors. Harris reportedly has yet to reconcile her clashes with Biden in a past debate, and some close to Biden worry that Harris would put her future presidential aspirations ahead of supporting Biden's agenda. Harris is reportedly meeting this week with the Biden campaign to address those concerns. With Biden leading President Donald Trump in presidential election polls, Democratic strategist Jared Leopold expects Biden to shy away from any controversy in selecting his running mate.
So I think that's what he's likely going to go for, is someone who is going to be a solid pick, someone who's trustworthy, someone who can step in on day one, but also someone who's not going to be a lightning rod for criticism.
Meanwhile, other potential vice presidential candidates are also being vetted. Karen Bass, an African-American congresswoman from California who recently emerged as a top contender, is facing criticism for remarks she made that opponents say praise Cuban leader Fidel Castro and the controversial Church of Scientology. Other African-American contenders include National Security Advisor Susan Rice, who has not run for political office in the past, as well as former Georgia state legislator Stacey Abrams and Florida Congresswoman Val Demings. Both face questions over lack of experience.
So then you have the problem or the dilemma of, do you choose someone who has less baggage, who isn't obviously unattractive in some way, but is not known and is not tested and can't prove that they could occupy the Oval Office successfully.
Other women politicians reportedly under consideration are Asian American Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois, a disabled veteran of the Iraq War, Michelle Lujan Grisham, the Latina governor of New Mexico, Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, and Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Sources now say Biden could announce his vice presidential pick sometime in the next 2 weeks, just before the start of the Democratic Party convention, where he will be officially nominated as the party's presidential candidate. Brian Padden, VOA News, Washington.
Conservationists in Australia are hoping infrared drones might help save the remaining koala population in New South Wales, one of the regions most affected by recent Australian bushfires. The infrared camera makes it easier to spot the iconic marsupials, not bears, which scientists say could be extinct by 2050. VOA's Mariama Diallo has this report.
Douglas Throne, a cinematographer from California, is using drones equipped with infrared cameras to help track koalas in the wild in the Australian state of New South Wales.
You fly the drone over an area and you do it while the ground is cooler, and then the heat of the animal pops up and you can see the shape of the koala, basically.
Throne had previously used his device to locate and rescue animals after Hurricane Dorian struck the Bahamas. While there, he learned of devastating bushfires in Australia.
I saw these videos of basically, koalas being burned up and people trying to rescue koalas.
The Australian bushfires in 2019 and 2020 killed or displaced nearly 3 billion animals, including koalas, kangaroos, and other native species, according to a study released last week by the Worldwide Fund for Nature. WWF called it one of the worst wildfire disasters in modern history. Now, with the ability to track koalas using drones, Stuart Blanche of WWF marvels at what he calls a breakthrough.
Drones are sort of a next-level way of quickly finding koalas across hectares of bush.
Volunteers also are tracking koalas. Sue Gay and her daughter regularly look for animals around their home in a town near Sydney. One method is to look for fresh koala feces.
Others tend to look up into the trees for them. I tend to look down, and I can tell more by that. So that's how I find them.
Then you've got the scratch marks on the trees as well.
While tracking koalas this way is slow, they say the effort to save them is worth it.
It's reality that in 30 years we may not have koalas, and our future generations need to be able to have that. So if anything, it was a kick in the bum. Let's get into action and save these guys.
The New South Wales Threatened Species Advisory Board, an independent committee of scientists, has started a review to determine whether the koala's status should be upgraded to endangered. The World Wildlife Fund warns that without urgent government intervention, koalas in eastern Australia could be extinct by 2050. Mariama Diallo, VOA News.
That's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thank you for watching.